Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed everything? Lose the uniform, sweetheart. You're embarrassing the real soldiers here. The words cut through the room like a blade, followed by low laughter, boots shuffling as they turned their backs on her. But she didn't flinch. She stood there, steady, composed, her eyes calm, hands at parade rest. No argument, no defense. They saw only the fabric on her back, not the battles behind it, and tried to strip away what they couldn't understand. But then the door opened. A four-star general walked in and saluted her. In that instant, the room froze, and everything they thought they knew shattered. Who was she? And why did that salute change everything? Stay with us to discover the story behind the salute that silenced them all. Fort Ridgemont's Joint Command Transition Program, formerly known as Fort Dannings, is no ordinary rotation assignment. Hidden behind the humdrum of administrative schedules and routine check-ins lies a program designed to shape leaders who will navigate the complexities of joint operations across Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps commands. It's a 2-week intensive that pushes seasoned officers beyond their comfort zones, preparing them for roles that require strategic vision, precision under pressure, and the ability to unify diverse forces under one mission. On paper, it sounds straightforward. Assess protocols, refine operational plans, and collaborate across service branches. But in reality, this program does more than test tactical skill. It exposes the biases and hidden dynamics embedded deep in military culture. For generations, programs like this have been dominated by officers who follow traditional career ladders. Male, older, often coming from combat arms or special operations backgrounds. These settings tend to reinforce unspoken codes about who belongs and who doesn't. Codes shaped by years of history, tradition, and often gendered expectations. When an officer like Captain Rachel Hartman walks in, young, female, and quiet, those codes are tested, and the room watches closely, sometimes with skepticism, sometimes with open hostility to see whether she'll measure up. Ever wondered what it takes to break through those barriers? Keep listening. Military culture is complex. On the surface, it values discipline, competence, and respect for rank. But beneath that, it can still be shaped by assumptions, especially in environments where the pressure is high and the stakes are real. A woman in uniform, particularly in a leadership track, often carries more than her rank on her shoulders. She bears the weight of having to prove that she belongs in a room where some see her as a symbol of change they didn't ask for. And when that woman is also young, as Rachel was, the scrutiny doubles. Her every move, word, and silence gets interpreted through the lens of those assumptions. Is she tough enough? Has she seen enough? Will she crack under pressure? Having spoken with and served alongside many women and younger officers in these environments, I can tell you this: their path is rarely smooth. I've seen brilliant officers dismissed in the first 10 seconds simply because they didn't look the part. I've seen them underestimated, talked over, and forced to outwork their peers just to stand on equal footing. But I've also seen those same officers rise above it, not with loud speeches or dramatic gestures, but with quiet, relentless competence. They learn quickly that their best weapon isn't argument, it's performance. When they deliver results that no one can ignore, the room changes. And often that change starts small. A question asked with genuine interest, a seat offered without hesitation, or in the case of Rachel's story, a salute from the highest rank in the room. This is the backdrop against which Rachel stepped into Fort Ridgemont's briefing room, a room filled with unspoken doubts, a room that would soon learn just how wrong assumptions can be. At precisely 0700 hours, the heavy steel door of Fort Ridgemont's main briefing room creaked open, and Captain Rachel Hartman stepped inside. The soft clatter of her polished boots on the concrete floor echoed briefly, filling the silence that hung between early morning chatter. She moved with the kind of deliberate calm that only comes from years of training. Every step measured, every gesture precise. There was no dramatic entrance, no announcement of rank, no flair, just a young officer reporting for duty. Rachel was 30 years old, but in that room of seasoned majors, lieutenant colonels, and senior NCOs, she might as well have been fresh out of the academy. Her Army combat uniform was immaculate. Sleeves pressed, rank insignia placed perfectly, boots shined to a mirror gloss that caught the morning light. Her dark hair neatly pulled into a low bun, framed a face that bore no trace of arrogance or insecurity, just steady resolve. Her eyes scanned the room, not with challenge or fear, but with quiet awareness. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to do a job. But the room had already judged her. Conversations that had hummed along moments before dropped to muttered comments just loud enough for her to hear. A staff sergeant leaned toward his buddy, smirking. "Look at that. Another PR pic. Bet she's never seen a real OP in her life." Someone else chuckled, their gaze sliding over Rachel like she wasn't even there. No one moved to offer her a seat. No one acknowledged her presence beyond the thinly veiled derision in their voices. The unspoken message was clear. "You don't belong here." Rachel didn't flinch. She moved to the side of the room, standing at parade rest. No words, no protest, no effort to explain herself. She had been here before, not in this room perhaps, but in rooms just like it, where people mistook her quiet for weakness and her youth for inexperience. "I've seen it too, time and time again in real-life military settings. A young female officer walks into a command post or briefing, and the room shifts. Not overtly, but in those subtle glances, the dismissive tone, the assumption that she's support staff, or worse, a symbolic hire. I remember one lieutenant I worked with during a joint exercise. She was sharp, fluent in 2 languages with combat deployments under her belt. But because she didn't fit the stereotypical mold, she spent the first week being handed coffee orders and admin tasks by peers who never bothered to check her file. It wasn't until she ran circles around them during a critical coordination drill that they even realized their mistake. And by then, the damage had been done, their respect earned, but their initial bias painfully obvious. What Rachel faced that morning at Fort Ridgemont wasn't just casual disrespect. It was the toxic weight of preconceived notions that still lingers in some corners of leadership culture. The idea that leadership looks a certain way, speaks a certain way, carries itself with a particular swagger that if you don't check those boxes, you must not be ready, or worse, you're only there because of some initiative or quota. And that toxicity doesn't just harm the person on the receiving end. It erodes the very foundation of what good leadership should be. It blinds capable leaders to talent standing right in front of them. It fosters division where there should be unity. And perhaps most dangerously, it creates an environment where silence isn't seen as strength, but as permission for bias to thrive unchecked. Rachel Hartman understood this. She didn't waste breath trying to prove her worth to men who had already decided she didn't have any. Instead, she let the moment pass, let their words hang in the air because she knew what they didn't yet realize. The room would belong to her soon enough. Not through titles or speeches, but through action, through competence so undeniable that even the most hardened skeptics would have no choice but to take notice. And so she stood there, steady, composed, waiting for her chance to show them who she truly was. From the moment Captain Rachel Hartman stepped into the room, the mockery began. Not with outright insults, but with the quieter, more corrosive forms of disrespect that cut just as deep. It was in the way eyes slid past her as if she didn't exist. In the smirks exchanged between officers who considered themselves seasoned, battle-hardened, and above reproach. It was in the whispered comments calculated to be loud enough for her to hear, but subtle enough to deny if called out. Bet she's here for the diversity stats. Maybe she's planning the next charity run or family picnic. Wonder if she's even qualified to load a rifle. They didn't say these things to her face. They didn't have to. Their tone, their posture, the dismissive glances, they all carried the same message. You don't belong here. Rachel stood in that storm of quiet contempt, and she didn't flinch. No sharp retort. No attempt to defend herself. She simply remained at parade rest, hands clasped behind her back, head high, eyes steady. She knew what was happening. This wasn't her first time in a room where the burden of proof rested unfairly on her shoulders. She didn't give them what they wanted, a reaction that would justify their bias. The moments of isolation added weight to the mockery. The operations clerk entered to distribute briefing folders. He handed them out to every seated officer, walking right past Rachel as though she were invisible. No nod, no acknowledgement of rank or presence, just a subtle erasure. When latecomers arrived and seats were shifted to make room, no one offered her a space. They watched her stand, and they let her stand as if she hadn't earned the right to sit among them. And then there was the quiet cruelty of being ignored in conversation. When officers traded updates about their prior deployments, no one asked Rachel about hers. When someone mentioned a mission she'd actually served on, no one turned to her for insight. She was treated as if she had nothing to contribute because, in their eyes, she didn't. Not yet. Not until she could prove over and over again that she deserved to be seen. I've seen this before. Too many times. A young officer, a woman in uniform, a minority leader, all stepping into rooms where they're not expected, where their competence is assumed lacking until proven otherwise. I remember a lieutenant in my own career, sharp, experienced, but quiet. Her male peers talked over her in planning sessions until the day she outplanned them in a live exercise. Even then, their respect came reluctantly, grudgingly, as if they resented that she'd forced them to reconsider their assumptions. The psychological toll of this kind of constant underestimation is real. It chips away at confidence, even in the strongest. Imagine showing up to work every day knowing that before you say or do anything, people have already decided you're unworthy. It means having to carry not just your duties, but the invisible weight of others' doubts. It means that where some are given the benefit of the doubt, you're given none. And every success is seen as the exception, not the rule. Yet Rachel handled it the way the strongest professionals do, by focusing on what she could control. She didn't let their words dictate her worth. She didn't shrink to avoid attention or lash out to demand respect. Instead, she leaned into what she knew, her training, her discipline, her quiet strength. In doing so, she showed a resilience that outclassed every comment, every smirk, every slight. This is the burden so many face. The burden of having to prove oneself, not once, but repeatedly. It's a reality for many women in underrepresented groups in traditionally male-dominated or hierarchical spaces. No mistake is forgiven. No success is assumed. You are tested again and again, and each victory is treated as if it erases nothing that came before. Rachel bore that burden without complaint because she knew, like so many before her, that the only path forward was through excellence. Her silent strength became her armor. Where others might have cracked under the strain of constant scrutiny, Rachel grew sharper. Where others might have sought external validation, she built it from within. And in doing so, she prepared herself for the moment that would come. The moment when her actions would speak louder than any defense she could offer, and when even the loudest doubters would fall silent. Because that is the truth of silent strength. It endures. It outlasts. And when the time comes, it triumphs in a way that noise never can. It started with the sound of boots. Sharp, measured, a rhythm that cut through the low hum of whispered side conversations and quiet chuckles that had filled the room. Colonel Thomas Reynolds entered, his presence snapping the group to attention, at least partially. The officers straightened in their seats, the casual slouch of their bodies replaced by a more practiced posture. The room, moments ago relaxed in its disrespect, now remembered its protocols. "Gentlemen and officers," the colonel said with the briefest glance in Rachel's direction. His voice filled the space, authoritative and precise. But it wasn't the colonel's words that would change the mood that day. It was what followed. Today's briefing will be led by someone with first-hand experience in the very operations we're tasked to review. Someone who's seen what these plans look like in practice, not just on paper. Murmurs spread across the room like ripples in still water. The officers' eyes darted between each other, searching for who the colonel might mean. Some looked toward the door, expecting a guest speaker, a battle-hardened major or a decorated special operations advisor. Then the colonel turned toward the back of the room. "Captain Hartman, please take the floor." In that instant, every head swiveled toward Rachel. The smirks faded. The laughter stopped. The officers who'd ignored her presence now stared in disbelief as she stepped forward, collected and unhurried. No hesitation, no visible emotion beyond her steady calm. Rachel picked up the dry erase marker at the front easel and began to outline a complex multi-phase operational plan. Without notes, without slides, without hesitation, her voice, soft yet firm, filled the room. She spoke of escalation timelines, rapid deployment contingencies, and extraction protocols with a fluency that no textbook could provide. Every point she made connected back to real-world scenarios. scenarios she had lived. At first, there was silence born of surprise. Then, as Rachel mapped out high-risk zones and described split-second decisions under fire, that silence transformed. It became the silence of learning, of listening, of reckoning. The very officers who had questioned her presence now leaned forward, their earlier contempt replaced by focused attention. Because what Rachel delivered wasn't theory. It was hard-won knowledge. The kind that comes from having made life-or-death calls, from having been in the places they'd only seen in after-action reports. I've seen this transformation before. The moment when a room of doubters realizes they're in the presence of someone who's done what they have only imagined. I recall a Marine logistics officer who was quietly dismissed until she outplanned an entire team during a disaster relief op. I remember a young Army captain whose calm dismantling of a flawed security plan made a room of skeptics fall silent. It's a powerful thing when quiet competence cuts through noise. In Rachel's case, as she spoke, you could see the change ripple through the room. Officers who dismissed her were now scribbling notes. The staff sergeant who'd cracked the cruelest joke sat stiff, his eyes fixed on the whiteboard. No one interrupted. No one challenged. Because Rachel's authority wasn't in her rank. It was in her mastery. And when she finished, there was no applause. No one dared. The room stayed quiet, humbled not by orders, but by the truth of what they'd witnessed. A leader who had earned every ounce of respect through action. That briefing reshaped the entire dynamic. The mocking had stopped, not because Rachel had silenced them with speeches or demanded respect, but because she had simply shown them the kind of leader they all aspired to be. And it was only the beginning of how the room would change. The room had fallen into a rare, reverent silence. After Rachel Hartman's briefing, flawless, focused, and delivered without so much as a glance at notes, the men who had spent the morning mocking her now sat rigid, their expressions a mix of discomfort, surprise, and quiet respect. What they just witnessed had shaken their assumptions to the core. Rachel hadn't just led a briefing. She had exposed their bias, not with words, but with undeniable expertise. Then it happened. The door at the back of the room swung open. Not slowly, not dramatically, just firmly, with a kind of confidence that didn't need announcement or permission. In stepped a figure that immediately changed the air in the room. General Richard Cross. For stars gleaming against the subdued camouflage of his well-worn combat uniform. There was no staff officer preceding him, no security detail flanking him, no fanfare at all, just a leader whose presence alone demanded attention. The room reacted the way any seasoned group of military professionals would. Chairs scraped back, boots planted firmly, and every man and woman shot to attention, spines straightening as if their very careers depended on it. Papers that had been scribbled on just moments before fluttered to the floor unnoticed. The casual arrogance that had hung in the air earlier was gone, replaced by a sharp, almost electric tension. Rachel didn't move. She didn't need to. She had been standing at perfect military bearing since she entered that room. And now, in the presence of the highest-ranking officer most of those men had ever seen up close, she was as steady as ever. General Cross paused just inside the doorway for a breath, eyes sweeping the room. But this wasn't the quick glance of a visitor passing through. This was the measured, calculating gaze of a leader who could read a room like a map, who could see not just where people stood, but where their loyalties, doubts, and convictions lay. And he saw it all in that instant. The officers who had doubted, the NCOs who had whispered, the faces of men caught between shame and admiration trying to reconcile the two. And then he saw Rachel. Without a word, General Cross crossed the room, boots striking the floor with a rhythm that echoed louder than the chatter that had filled the space earlier that morning. He passed by the colonel who had overseen the session, by the senior NCOs who had smirked and sneered, by the officers who had done nothing to stop the mockery. His gaze didn't waver. His path didn't pause. He stopped directly in front of Captain Rachel Hartman. What happened next took only a second, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. General Cross looked Rachel in the eyes, lifted his hand, and rendered a crisp, formal salute. The kind of salute given not out of courtesy, but out of earned respect. The kind of salute that says, "I see you. I see what you've done, and you have my full recognition." The room froze. Not a breath was drawn. Not a boot shifted. Not a paper rustled. The same men who had mocked Rachel that morning now stood as if carved from stone, unable to look away from the simple, powerful gesture unfolding before them. And in that moment, everything they thought they knew shattered. Because that salute wasn't just for Rachel's flawless briefing. It wasn't just for her calm under pressure or her mastery of the operation at hand. It was for all the unseen work that had brought her to that room, the missions flown under fire, the lives saved in chaos, the decisions made in the loneliest moments of leadership. General Cross knew it, and now so did everyone else. I've seen moments like this in my own career. Rare, humbling moments when true recognition is given without fanfare, without ceremony, just with a gesture that says more than words ever could. I once saw a command sergeant major pause in a war zone chow hall to shake the hand of a young specialist who'd held a perimeter alone during an attack. I remember a senior officer taking the time to thank a junior medic who'd worked through the night saving civilians. These moments stay with you, and they change you. When General Cross lowered his salute, he spoke only one sentence, but it was a sentence that would be remembered by everyone in that room. It's always encouraging to see our best continuing to do the quiet work that makes everything else possible. And with that, he turned and walked out as steadily as he had entered. No need for further explanation. No need for ceremony. The message had been delivered. The lesson had been taught. Rachel didn't break posture. She didn't look for approval from the room. She simply acknowledged the general's salute with her own and returned to her place as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, because for her perhaps it hadn't. She had always known who she was. Now so did they. The room remained silent long after General Cross had gone. No one dared speak. No one dared offer the empty apologies that would have felt hollow against the weight of what they had just witnessed. In that silence, something shifted, something that no speech or reprimand could have achieved. Respect had been given, not demanded, and it had been earned in the truest way. Through action, Rachel's presence had changed the room. General Cross's salute had changed the men, and neither would be forgotten. The door clicked shut behind General Evelyn Cross, leaving behind a silence thicker than any lecture or reprimand could have achieved. No one moved at first. The officers, NCOs, and clerks stood rooted, each lost in their own thoughts, processing what they had just witnessed. Moments earlier, many of them had been so sure of their judgments, so certain of their place in the hierarchy, so confident in their assumptions about Rachel Hartman. And in a matter of seconds, that certainty had crumbled. Rachel didn't linger at the front of the room. She quietly returned to her place, standing off to the side as the next portion of the briefing began. She didn't gloat. She didn't look for acknowledgement. Her posture remained unchanged, steady, professional, as if the salute from a four-star general had been no more remarkable than a morning roll call. But for the others in the room, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The shift in attitude was subtle at first. When Rachel walked through the hallways of Fort Ridgemont that afternoon, heads lifted in greeting where before they had turned away. In the mess hall, conversations didn't stop when she passed. They continued, but now with a respectful quiet threaded through them. At the next session, chairs were nudged aside to make room without anyone having to ask. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. We were wrong. By the following morning, Rachel's presence commanded a new kind of attention. Not because of the salute alone, but because of what it had represented. Officers who had mocked her now listened when she spoke. NCOs who had ignored her now addressed her with the courtesy her rank had always deserved. And yet Rachel herself did not change. She didn't soften to gain favor, nor did she harden to hold grudges. She simply did the work as she always had, quietly, confidently, and without seeking applause. That's the thing about legacy in environments like the military. It isn't built on speeches or ceremonies. It's built on moments. Moments like the one they had all witnessed. And that moment rippled far beyond the walls of that briefing room. The story spread through Fort Ridgemont with the speed of military gossip, but with the weight of a lesson learned the hard way. Officers began referencing it in quiet conversations, using it as a reminder to check their assumptions, to look past the surface. I've seen this pattern before. One gesture, one act of recognition can transform not just a room, but an entire culture. I remember working with a team where a single act of bravery from a quiet, overlooked staff sergeant reshaped how that unit valued its members. The same thing happened here. The salute didn't just validate Rachel's competence. It challenged everyone else to reconsider what true leadership and strength look like. And what of Rachel? She didn't ask for that legacy. She didn't set out to prove anything. But in staying true to herself, in enduring the mockery, in delivering when it mattered, in standing steady while others wavered, she created it. Her story became part of Fort Ridgemont's institutional memory. A quiet reminder passed from one rotation to the next that real authority isn't in appearance or bravado. It's in action. And that respect once earned in the right way echoes far beyond the walls where it was first given. Rachel's legacy wasn't built in that moment alone. But that moment ensured it would never be forgotten. Rachel Hartman's story isn't just a military lesson. It's a human one. What happened in that briefing room could just as easily happen in a workplace, a school, a town hall, or even around a family dinner table. How often do we make snap judgments based on how someone looks, how old they are, what their title is, or isn't, without waiting to see what they're truly capable of? Rachel's experience reminds us that real strength and value are found in actions, not appearances. In today's world, it's easy to be distracted by surface-level signals. We see the loudest voices getting the most attention, the boldest claims stealing the spotlight. But Rachel showed us another way. The way of quiet competence. She didn't argue. She didn't demand that others respect her. She stood steady, let her work speak, and in doing so changed the minds of everyone in that room. That's a lesson we can all take into our own lives. Whether we're leading a team at work, raising children, volunteering in our communities, or simply trying to be a decent neighbor, what matters most is what we do, not how we're perceived at first glance. Rachel also teaches us about the importance of standing firm in our values, even when we're doubted or dismissed. She could have let the mockery get under her skin. She could have lashed out or tried to overcompensate, but she didn't. She held fast to her training, her experience, and her self-respect. In a world that often pressures us to prove ourselves in loud, flashy ways, there's deep power in remaining true to who we are. That kind of integrity, that quiet strength, it doesn't just change a room, it changes hearts. And let's be honest, many of us have been in Rachel's shoes at some point. Maybe in a meeting where your ideas were brushed aside until someone else said them. Maybe in a family where you felt invisible until you stepped up when it mattered most. Or maybe you've watched someone else, a friend, a colleague, a partner, face those same struggles, fighting not with words, but with steady, tireless action. Rachel's story invites us to honor those moments of quiet heroism, to remember that sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who don't need to announce it. So, here's where I ask something of you. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever stood silent but strong in a moment that mattered? Or have you known someone who did? Someone who earned respect not through noise but through deeds? Share that story in the comments. Let's create a space where quiet strength is celebrated. Where we recognize the power of those who don't always seek the spotlight, but who carry the weight when it counts. And while you're here, if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you admire or made you think differently about how we judge others, please like this video and subscribe to the Valor Stories channel. We share more touching stories just like this, where silent strength speaks louder than words, where ordinary people remind us what true courage looks like. Together, let's shine a light on those who lead, not with noise, but with quiet integrity. Thank you for watching and for being part of a community that sees beyond the surface.